I'm Dave Greenwood, and this is Overcoming Distractions. If you are an adult with ADHD, a busy professional, an entrepreneur, a high achiever, or you just need some strategies to navigate your adult ADHD, you are in the right place. Who am I? I'm an entrepreneur with ADHD and the author of 2 books, Overcoming Distractions and Overcoming Burnout. I've worked with hundreds of people just like you, and together we navigate the ups and downs of adult ADHD. Want more info on working with me? Hit overcomingdistractions.com. Ready? Let's get to today's podcast. All right, gang, we're back. It's Overcoming Distractions. You are in the right place if you are that busy professional adult with ADHD. And you want to chat about street smart ways to thrive with ADHD. You want to work on the mechanics of your ADHD. That's what we do here. So we are going to chat. I will say I have the co-host of Taking Control, the ADHD podcasts. And if you know me and you've listened to me for any length of time, you know that control is one of my favorite words when it comes to managing and thriving as a busy adult with ADHD, because I always think there's things we can take control of. So we're going to address that in just a moment. But we got Nikki Kinzer, we got Pete Wright. They are the co-hosts of Taking Control, the ADHD podcast. Yes, there are other podcasts out there. And they're the authors of the new book, Unapologetically ADHD. Nikki, you're an ADHD coach. Pete, you're a professional podcaster, right?
Indeed.
Yeah.
So, professional ADHDer too.
Well, yes, of course. I left that part out. Yeah. So, well, welcome, guys. I forget I think we chatted like a year and a half ago. I forgot what we chatted about, but as we talked about before I hit the record button, I forget things 15 minutes after they happen. So I mean, that's, it's just...
We do too. So yeah. It's good.
Well, either way, it's good to see you again, Dave.
Yes, it's good to see you and hear you. And I'm always up for a great discussion with a little bit of laughter and a little bit of that self whatever, so I try not to take everything seriously. So first of all, the book, probably when this comes out, the book will be out. So I'll just say you were the authors of the book, Unapologetically ADHD. So why the name? Why did you come up with that title?
Good question. We went back and forth on a lot of different types of, or different titles. Had a lot of conversation around the subtitle because it is a book specifically around planning. It's not a book that is just everything about ADHD. So we wanted to make sure that when you picked it up, you knew what it was about. But I think that the key for Unapologetically ADHD, the message throughout the book is to stop apologizing. You are able to live with ADHD and get everything that you want and thrive in your life and not have to apologize for who you are. And so the book is partnering with your ADHD. It's embracing it. It's saying, yes, I have this thing. It disrupts my day. It disrupts how I plan, but it doesn't have to stop me from being effective. It doesn't have to stop me from having a resilient plan when ADHD shows up, because it will show up because you have ADHD. So we want people to be who they are and embrace that and advocate for themselves.
Yeah, I think one of the sort of not too subtle messages in the book is that so many planning systems, so many, productivity tools are designed by and for people who are not on the ADHD end of the neurodiversity spectrum. Yeah. And so we ADHDers end up trying to adopt these tools. And we feel so bad when they don't work, when our offices hand down another software tool and say, just use this, it's going to make you more productive. And then when it doesn't, what else do you say? But I'm sorry, boss, I can't. I'm sorry, I'm falling behind on deadlines. I'm sorry, I'm dropping meetings. I'm sorry, I'm not able to comprehend time the way you are, or prioritization the way you do. I think this book says let's be done with that part of it.
Yeah.
Let's be done with
Mhm.
feeling bad and apologizing when neuronormative systems fail neurodivergent people.
And I think you probably would agree that we apologize to ourselves, correct? Not just like
Mhm.
externally, but internally, we're constantly apologizing to ourselves, right?
I think right after we scream and yell at ourselves, right?
Right.
Like that's a sort of normal state of speech is talking to myself worse than I talk to my friends and family. Like I'm generally my biggest antagonist, and then I end up having to apologize for it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I love the kind of the subtitle of it, because you talk about a step-by-step yet flexible framework. And I think a lot of people with ADHD think they need some type of rock solid bulletproof system. And we also need to recognize that, especially the audience of this podcast, where it's busy professionals, they have a demanding career, they have kids, all the other things going on in their lives. And I think that we need those systems, we need those routines, we need those repeatable systems, that get us through the day, that we make us fulfilled and not stressed out. But also, we've got to realize, hey, we're living in the real world, right? And that's that flexibility.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, and we really spent a lot of time thinking about the vocabulary around the book and how we were going to talk about things. And that framework became really important. It became an important word with a lot of meaning behind it, right? Because it is just a framework. It can look different for different people, and it can for you in different periods of your life. My husband and I were just talking this morning. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning, and I'm getting my coffee and he's feeding the animals, and we're empty nesters essentially. And so I was like, do you remember that it was just a few years ago when right now at this moment we were making lunches and packing backpacks and making sure that everybody had everything that they needed and try to get out the door at time. And we kind of reminisced about that a little bit. And our life is different now than it was then. And our systems have to change when life changes and our needs change and our ADHD looks different. And so, this book is not just, oh, this is how you do it. It's a framework with a lot of flexibility
Yeah.
and resilience to when ADHD shows up.
Yeah,
And
so much
that,
about that is realigning our expectations, rewiring expectations of the systems we use. That
yeah,
if you're living with ADHD, you've got to understand that your system's going to change, and it might change every 2 weeks. It might change every 3 years. What is fantastic and horrific about it is that you don't know when it's going to change, and you've got to be patient with yourself, knowing that sometimes change is part of the system. It's got to be built in.
right. And I made it a habit over the years of every couple weeks, literally just like sitting at my desk, looking at my calendar and other commitments, and seeing how I could just fine tune it. Maybe it was like, I'm going to move this over here, or maybe I can do this type of task or project here instead of here. But I think it's that constant kind of massaging of your days and your weeks, right? To just be able to make things better.
Well,
And
isn't
what
it
you're
funny, David, that you're just what you're describing? You're like me. Like for me, my ADHD turns on around systems, and
Yeah.
like I love being introspective about how the work it gets put together, and going through that process is cathartic and lovable and a source of potentially dangerous hyperfocus. I'll forget other things because I'm so busy working on the navigation of the things. And others ADHD that needs to be accounted for are those whose brains don't attune well to like managing systems every 2 weeks, and instead of diving in and pulling the wires apart, it gets avoided. And how do you become flexible when your head's in the sand, because that's a natural state.
Right. Right.
I was just going to comment that what you're explaining too, David, is intentional planning. You're really being more intentional about how you're spending your time. And I think so many ADHDers, because of that impulsiveness, because of the people pleasing, because boundaries they may get set, but they get crossed over a lot, are overcommitting, right? Which is overwhelming. And you don't want to let somebody down. So you say yes. And then all of a sudden you've got 5 meetings in a day, and 5 meetings is too many meetings for you. And so what I'm hearing is that you're sitting back and saying, wait a minute, maybe, this makes more sense here, and I can be more intentional around it. And that's part of the message too, and one of the final steps of building a planning system is how do you be more intentional to live a life and a schedule that works for you, and you're not overwhelmed and stressed out all the time. And that takes practice, and it takes time to sit and reflect and think about how things are going right now, and how do you want them to be. And we don't do that on our own. We typically just do whatever's in front of us. So I hope it gives people some pause to think about, what do they really want?
No, and that's exactly where I was going, is that I've talked to so many people, and I ask them, where life's chaotic and I can't keep up at work and all this stuff, and I said, well, when was the last time, do you ever slow down? And they go, well, no. I'm like, when was the last time you just kind of sat there at your desk and looked at everything? I don't know. I never do that. And one strategic thing that's worked for me is I've forced myself to slow down at least one time a week. I have a meeting with myself. It's a half hour. It's recurring invite, endless in my calendar, that says, this is Monday morning meeting. I'm going to stop. I'm going to pause, and I'm going to see what can I adjust. And you could do something simple as, I don't really need to do that meeting on Friday. And if I actually didn't do that meeting on Friday, or I asked somebody if we could move it, I could have an entire day where I could get a crap load of stuff done. And that's just those little tweaks and those flexibility that you talk about. Right? Yeah.
I think I think it's so important, and so important for ADHDers to hear, but also for just like busy entrepreneurs, busy people who are trying to get things done, who have learned, I'll say it, they've learned the wrong lesson from hustle culture, right? Who wear busyness like a badge of honor. Like, I don't have time to plan. I don't have time to be thoughtful about the work that I do because I'm so busy. And in some circles, I guess that's cool. Maybe I've aged out of it. That doesn't feel cool. It doesn't feel like I'm actually being able to contribute at my best when I'm not able to slow down and, like you say, remind myself that introspection is not it's not a yoke that I have to wear, right? It's actually as Zig Ziglar said, right? Like biscuits cooking in an oven, you've got to squat so you can jump higher. Squatting is being introspective and slowing down in order to be more productive later and to find that zone.
Right. Yeah. No, I would totally agree. So it looks like you cover a ton of stuff in this book, but I think one of the first things you, and it maybe kind of relates to what we were just talking about. One of the first things you talk about is to kind of manage that all or nothing mode. That's one of the key areas you say is in the book. So can you kind of explain that? And I can't imagine people listening are not going to relate to that.
Yeah, totally foreign to most people with ADHD, I'm sure.
Right. It just happens to be like a conversation point in almost every coaching call I ever have. Yeah, it's it comes so natural to think of that all or nothing thinking, and just, to describe what that means. And I know most people know, but just to have that description is, if something doesn't go the way that you think it's going to go, it really feels like the rest of the day is ruined. It's also a lot of perfectionism can come into play, where if it's not a perfect product, I'm not going to put it out yet. So I'm going to not only avoid it probably, but I'm not going to communicate about it either. Right. So I'm just going to sit on it, which what does that do? It makes you feel worse and puts you in that shame spiral. So when you have the all or nothing thinking, you have no options, you have no control. And that's a really awful place to be. And so part of what we want to be exploring here is that you do have options. So let's change those questions to, instead of what if this doesn't work out? What if it does work out? What if it works out in a different way than you expected? What if you just assumed that your day is not going to go as planned? But that's okay. I can still welcome that and I can still have a productive day. What if your expectations were lower because they're too high right now? And, can you change your mindset of, but I got this really important thing done, and really focus on what got done rather than everything else that is to be done. And so there's a lot of like kind of mindset shifting and thinking things differently and really just flipping the questions to open up those options for you.
Would you agree that all or nothing also means sitting down at our desk, having 20 things to do, entering decision fatigue, and then getting nothing done?
Oh, classic characteristic of ADHD.
It's like 8 a.m.
Overwhelm
on Monday morning, right? That's what you're describing.
Yeah.
For many ADHDers, this is my 8 a.m. routine. I'm going to look at everything I have to do and then do nothing.
And then do nothing. Yeah. And it's interesting because we just had a conversation about this on our show, and, Pete enlightened me, as he always does, where he was talking about when he has his work box. And what we mean by work box is your calendar and your task manager. When you're looking at your task manager, he's choosing like those, 1 or 2 things that he's going to focus on. And then he puts the task manager away so that he can just focus on those 1 or 2 things, or that one thing, right? Because you really only do one thing at once. And it's such an interesting concept, because I think that what happens is we look at all 20 things all day long, and that's where we get stuck. But if we can get through the prioritizing and the decision-making of one thing, and then put the other stuff away and just focus on that, you have a better chance of actually moving forward on your projects.
I would throw in there too, like I stopped doing my introspective like planning time in the morning, because the morning tends to be really productive time for me. And I can find myself so easily getting, quote, productive by just looking at my tasks and not actually doing anything, that I started doing that productive time. For my weekly planning is on Thursday at the very end of my day, because I'm not excited to dig into a new project Thursday, like late afternoon. But I am excited to put the 1 or 2 things on the calendar that I'm going to check off the list on Monday morning. And knowing that I already know what I'm going to do Monday morning saves me a boatload of intellectual energy, that high calorie planning burn that goes on in our brain, by separating those as discrete activities. Close my work system, and just do the one thing that shows up first.
Yeah. And I found, to kind of add to that, is that I would do that the night before. When I was running my PR firm, we had a bunch of clients. There was everything from, media relations to video production. There was all bunch of wheels in that. But I thought that before I walked away from my desk the night before, if I had a general idea of what needed to be done, and it wasn't 20 things, you'd maybe whittle it down to a few urgent things that absolutely needed to be done. That kind of primed the pump for the next day, because you can't just walk up to a desk, sit down, and go, cool, let's just
begin.
No, and I think you're right. You waste that energy when in trying to figure out what to do and sorting things out, when if you knew what to do, you could just sit down and maximum. Because for me, that was and still is that prime kind of brain time for me, where it's like 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. After that, after that,
turn into a pumpkin. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I could throw ice cold water in my face and maybe grunt out another couple hours.
Yeah,
but,
right.
But those are,
Yeah.
I don't want to waste that time trying to figure out what to do,
Well, yeah,
Right,
and
right,
don't
exactly.
like, let's not sleep on the fact that once you unintentional joke incoming. Let's not sleep on the fact that once you do your planning for the next day the night before, your brain does so much prep for you while you are asleep, right? The fact that you get that like bonus cognitive engine going before you even wake up and sit down at your desk, like you find over time you're more ready to start the day because you did your planning before you started the day.
I think it actually helps you sleep because it
Yeah.
minimizes the chances of that 3 a.m. like gasp.
I forgot to do this one thing. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And then it takes you.
How did you know that I just sent myself an email at 3 a.m. to not forget something? Did you know that?
I just know it.
True story. It happened. I woke up this morning and there was an email from me at 3 a.m. to not forget something.
Hey, look, I have email this morning. It's from me.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I hate to admit this, but I would keep a colorful post-it thing in front of my keyboard for those times where it was like, because I have a home office like a lot of us do, and it was something would come into play, and it was like, I just got to get this out of my head.
Yeah.
So
It's true.
Yeah. What other kind of, obviously the book's going to be awesome. I haven't read it yet, but I know it's going to be awesome because it's you guys. But what other kind of mission critical things are in this book that might be a little different from other ADHD books, or what are the must-haves that you had in this book?
I want to start with this, and then I'm going to pass it to Pete, because I think his contribution to this book is what makes it different and what I think makes it really special, along with the method that I'm teaching. We wanted this book to be similar to how our podcast works, right? So if you listen to our podcast, I'm coming from the ADHD perspective. Pete is coming from the ADHD perspective. And we have these conversations just like we're having today. And he's a brilliant storyteller. He's a very creative writer. And so what makes the book different is that, yes, it gives you this method, but then in each chapter, there's these essays that are from Pete. And so, when Pete's talking and when Nikki's talking, and what he's able to do is share his own experience with these really creative analogies and his own personal experiences, with also these like special little golden nuggets that he can share with his own experience. And I think that's what makes it different, is that you get to see the how-to, but then you get to see somebody else's perspective. And this is what it's like. This is how this is hard. Like, he has this whole essay about this is ADHD, and he doesn't fluff it. He's like, this is ADHD. It's hard. But then there's this like hope and inspiration of it doesn't have to be the end all. Like, it's just something you partner with. So Pete, I want you to expand more on like where you're coming from as the, co-writer from your part of the book.
Well, for me, I don't know. David, I hope it appeals to you because I know from your entrepreneurial background, like maybe I will be speaking in a language that you relate to. I taught at an MBA program for about 15 years. And so in my lifelong search for metaphor, I end up writing these essays about like system fragility from the perspective of global supply chains. Yeah. And like, that's just kind of the way my brain works. I hope it's funny and relatable, but the idea is like, this is my flavor of ADHD and how it relates to the planning process that we're talking about. So, we talk about, system fragility. We talk about failure and reprogramming our ideas around failure and how we learned about failure. We talk about emergent behaviors. That's a huge, huge thing for ADHD. And I feel like I wanted to get that out because I haven't heard much of it in other ADHD literature. The idea that sometimes the explicit behaviors that we do every day lead to implicit behaviors that emerge as a result of that. And how can we retune our behavior in order to create new outcomes, like fish schooling? And so, we're trying to really just showcase through story and metaphor how the practical planning stuff comes to bear. And so, I think the book from our perspective, it's very much a conversation, between me and Nikki, like she said, like the podcast. You don't have to have listened to the podcast to hopefully enjoy it, but maybe you'll want to listen to the podcast after you read it. That's, I guess
But
that's
think
a hope.
No, but I think you are speaking my language, because that's the way I wrote my two books, is where we had conversations with the people on the street,
Right.
Yeah.
I won't say, I don't make any money on the book anymore, but overcoming distractions was, I would have done a lot of things different, but that's what I did, is I interviewed entrepreneurs with ADHD, because I think we do hear a lot of other ways that ADHD is discussed. We hear a lot about children. We don't hear a lot about successful people who have kind of learned how to actually, work with their brain, and mitigate the negatives. And then when I wrote Overcoming Burnout, the same way. I mean, I'm not a clinician. I'm not a doctor. The only way I could write a book about burnout is to bring in real life stories. But I also did that because I wanted people to understand that, that maybe how bad this can get if you don't do certain things. And I think that's the same thing with ADHD. I think there's, we use the phrase in Overcoming Burnout, we're co-founders of our burnout. I actually think we could be kind of co-founders of our negative ADHD behaviors, correct? I mean, there's things you can control, there's things you can't, especially in a workplace, right?
That gets me thinking, when we think about successful people with ADHD, it usually comes in the form of, I don't know, like what would have been like a BuzzFeed list. Like, did you know these 10 successful people had ADHD? And they're all brilliant and they all create magnificent things. And it's great. It's a top 10 greatest hits of people with ADHD. But I think where we're getting to now, and this is not just about our book, it's about your books. It's about the books of people who are living with ADHD and doing the work to tell these stories and to talk about it out loud. We're in an era of emergent ADHD learning, and I think it's brilliant that so many people are coming at ADHD from these different perspectives to share lived experience and help people earn their spot on the BuzzFeed list, right? Like, that's what we get by talking about it, because none of the people who are on that list, invariably, none of them have ever told a story publicly about how they live in concert and conflict with their own brains. And here we are. We're trying to do that in a different way.
Right. Right. And I think I said this to somebody, because I've had different entrepreneurs on the podcast that have had rough times. They've pulled themselves out. They've got to a level of self-awareness and owning their ADHD, and they realize that some of the things they were doing maybe caused it. But I said this to one person. I'm like, I love a good dumpster fire story. But I say that because I think there's a lot you can unpack from those.
Sure.
I don't mean to be rude or disrespectful to anybody, but like you say, it's like the rich guy who founded this airline or this, that, or the other thing. I mean, was he living under a bridge? I don't think so. Maybe he was, but
maybe he was. But the fact is, there are a lot of workaday people who are working really hard, earning a great living, and they live with ADHD, and those are the systems and stories. And sometimes, like you used to say, we're co-founders of our burnout. That's what you said.
Yeah,
that is such a brilliant line, and I don't think we can afford to undervalue the impact of great language to change the way we live our own lives. Like that, I can very much feel that becoming a mantra for me. Like when I'm feeling burnt out, I'm a co-founder of that. You just gave me something that was a huge gift that's going to change. And I'm not like, this is not just by way of example. I'm telling you, that has an impact on me. I've never heard that, and I love it. And it's going to change the way I live my life. And all we can do is hope that we come, like, speaking royal we come across lines like that impact the way we live our lives and change the way we plan and schedule and achieve, because it's out there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think taking that phraseology to the ADHD world, I think there's a lot we need to own when it comes to the workplace. There's a lot a workplace can do to understand different brains and support them, and realize that if they do it properly and have an open mind and realize that this person really is great at what they do, but they need the supports in place or what have you, then that's a massive win as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and find, if you're out there looking for a job and you have an opportunity to work for somebody with ADHD, your experience might be mixed, particularly if they just learned about their own ADHD. It's probably going to be, speaking of a dumpster fire, it's probably going to be tough working for somebody who's just learning about their ADHD. But somebody who's been living with ADHD for a bunch of years, that's a real gem to have as somebody who's in your corner and is willing to be your manager, your leader, your CEO. Those are gems. And I think we're at a point, like just leaning in on my earlier point, we're at a place where more and more people are talking about how they manage their lives, that we're seeing more leaders who are talking about the impact that their brains have on their workaday and their success and their failure. And we can learn from them, and we can love working for them, even though sometimes it's hard.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we wrap up, somebody reads this book, they close it. What do you want them to say about the book? That, what kind of impact do you want a reader to have with this book when they finish it?
As long as it takes.
As long as it takes. Yeah.
It's fine.
In fact, I even write in one of the paragraphs, it says something about, I know, I have tons of self-help books. I'm sure lots of people do, and they sit on the shelf. And if this is one of yours that sits on the shelf, that's okay. When you're ready, we'll be here, pick it back up and we'll be here. Cause that's, we know that. I hope that it's a book that is used. I hope it's a book that is not just read, but that you actually look at the exercises. There's a lot of coaching exercises. There's a lot of questions being asked here, that you go through those. And if a planning system is something that you really want to build, that you practice and have this book available and opened and review it. And when you do close it and you feel like, yeah, I've got a calendar that's working, I've got a task manager that's working, and it doesn't matter if it's paper or digital or both or whatever. And you start to notice that, oh, it's not working anymore, because it will happen, right? This is going to happen. That you come back to the book and say, wait a minute, I can start again. And I can use this as a reference to pick up and figure this thing out. So I hope it's a book that's used, not just read.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Great.
I agree with that. I think it's not a weekend read, right? It's not intended to be something that you work all week and then you come and settle in and read your ADHD book because it's the next ADHD book on your stack and you're using kind of your weekend thinking time to think about it. This is a book that's designed to be sitting on your desk when you're actively planning. It's designed to help give you guidance. What I really hope happens when you close the book is that you say to yourself, God, I don't have to live in that state of constant, just gentle self-loathing all the time, because I'm in this book. I'm reflected in this book, and I'm not alone. I can, not to be trite, but I can be unapologetically ADHD. That's who I am.
Yeah. Awesome. So we'll have the links to the book in the show notes, as us podcasters always like to say. So
yes.
And come back anytime and let us know how the book is doing. And I'm eager to dig into it. So thanks again for the great conversation.
Well,
thank you for having us.
Yeah.
It is, and I say this genuinely, it's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
No matter when the conversations happen, it's a pleasure, always.
right, guys, we'll see you soon.